Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ruth O'Reilly, and I work at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, which is part of the National Disability Authority. My role, in essence, is to promote universal design in the built environment, and as part of that, the Centre has been working for 9 years now with the RIAI to support them with the Universal Design category in their Architecture Award scheme. Part of that support is to nominate a jury chair to work with the Universal Design Taskforce on the Universal Design Award. And we were absolutely delighted this year when Rod Bond agreed to take on that role and also to present to us today at today's webinar. Before I move on, just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see that ISL interpreter Catherine White is with us here today. And we also have Judith from PCR who is providing real-time captioning. So if you'd like to use the closed captions, you should have a button at the bottom of your screen to turn that on. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of Rod's presentation. And please use the Q&A button on your screen if you'd like to send us in a question for that. I'm now going to pass you over to Caitriona Shaffrey. I've had the pleasure of working with Caitriona for a number of years on the RIAI Universal Design Taskforce. And Caitriona is going to introduce Rod and welcome him on behalf of the task force. So over to you, Caitriona.
Thank you, Ruth. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Rod Bond. Rod is an architect who is Programme Director of the Netwell Centre, Dundalk, and was heavily involved in the Great Northern Haven, which is an innovative housing project for older people in Dundalk. He's been involved in the WHO Age-Friendly Cities movement from its inception, and he's committed to improving people's quality of life through placemaking, service improvement, and social innovation. Recently, I had the pleasure of working with Rod on a project for Louth County Council as part of Healthy Ireland Design Innovation Project, where his vast knowledge and clarity of thought was expressed in his presentation for the benefit of the local authority staff who attended the seminar. Thank you very much. I will now pass you over to Rod Bond. Thank you.
There we go. Can we see the screen? We're all okay? Yeah, great. Caitriona, thank you very, very much for those very kind words. And I was really thrilled to have been invited to join the jury for this year's Universal Design Awards. And really delighted that the RIAI and the Centre of Excellence on Universal Design have given me the opportunity to give this webinar today. I suppose in preparing for this, I realized that while a lot of the work that I've been doing in the area of aging in place has tended to span local ecosystems and project partners and stakeholders at kind of county and regional levels, I've actually never come face to face with a large group of my fellow architects and peers. So my enthusiasm for today's presentation with so many of you is tinged with a little bit of trepidation, but so please be kind. But thank you all for taking the time to come and join us today on this webinar. I suppose the focus that I'd like to take today is on placemaking, on housing and home, and on successful longer living. And I suppose in addressing how to approach housing for our future selves or future aging, I think the presentation will focus really on the interplay between, I suppose, three interwoven impulses: that of people and place and our changing and aging over time, that of the environment, and particularly how it shapes and is shaped by our culture of care and caring. And I suppose finally, that of common presence or our programming, analysis and design processes, I suppose, that aim to help make the places that we will want to live in and grow old in, to help us support to grow old gracefully and with dignity and respect. But before I get into those three impulses, I'll talk a little bit about some context and scene setting, and then finish with some pointers going forward. So for some context and scene setting, and I suppose I'd really like to anchor the presentation in the idea of polarities of place and that of inclusivity and isolation. And this drawing on the slide is a 2011 drawing by Christine Wong Yap and was in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And it is a homage to the work of the great human geographer Yi Fu Tuan's Space and Place. And in it, we see the human yearning for both shelter and safety of place and the venture and freedom of space. It reads, a healthy being welcomes constraint and freedom, the boundedness of place and the exposure of space. And this sets up a range of kind of space polarities around movement and rest, about going places and coming back, about insideness and outsideness, about a sense of our belonging and our sense of separation from things. Both around the ordinary and the extraordinary, those things that are maybe too tedious and routine and those that are unexpected. The within and the without, that around, I suppose, refuge and sanctuary and our exposure. And I suppose some sense of home world and alien world, things that are done our way and otherness. And I suppose that provides a backdrop for all of our interactions, our identity, our outward growth, our inner growth and spiritual intensification, our freedom and choice, and I suppose the balance and order and harmony that we have in our lives and the world around us. So very much around a sense of place and a sense of belonging. But it's not always guaranteed to succeed. The photo on the left is of Sao Paulo in Brazil and shows the favela being walled off from an affluent neighborhood. I suppose along with demographic change, which is a big part of our discussion today, urbanization, globalization, and climate change are all challenging for attention in how we shape the evolution of our cities going forward. We now have loads of city initiatives, smart cities, creative cities, green cities, inclusive cities, age-friendly cities, child-friendly, shrinking, healthy. And they're all vying support for the delivery of our specialist interests and concerns. And I suppose how we challenge this diverse community activism and energy into coherent and aligned actions across all these themes is a huge organizational challenge for our time. However, along with fractured places, we can also have fractured and vanishing communities and intense isolation. The photo on the right is of a Kodakushi, which is a specialist team that comes in to clean up many months after a lonely death. And there are thousands of lonely deaths in Japanese cities every year, in some part attributed to a dearth of social capital in Japanese culture. We may be at different ends of the spectrum here in Ireland, but we are not immune to the risks of isolation and how it can negatively affect us. Age-friendly environments and age-friendly housing are gradually finding and strengthening their place in the milieu of policy initiatives at local government and local government development. And over the last few years, I've been helping several county councils with the development of their age-friendly strategies and Healthy Ireland strategies, trying to ensure that they are embedded in county development plans and local economic and community plans. This diagram shows a hierarchy of policy areas from the global through to the national and down to the local, spanning sustainability, settlement, health, disability, and aging. In County Louth, by the time these policy strands were converging in local and economic community plans, some 50% of them were either directly or indirectly linked to, or could be influenced by, applying universal design principles and goals. As such, I think universal design can be seen both as a proofing mechanism and as a driver for innovation at the local level. While still at a very early implementation stage, the Irish Age-Friendly programme is quite unique. The original World Health Organization programme was very much conceived as a cities-led project, connecting city governance and its stakeholders with older citizens of all socioeconomic levels and with public and private providers. By linking it to our county structures, supported by a national shared services team, the Irish programme here is the first to have a really truly national reach with a common agenda at a county level framed within the WHO's domains here. These 8 domains really kind of cluster around place, around people, and around society, and offer a promising opportunity of informing and guiding more responsive age-friendly planning and housing in the years to come. suppose a very important early step in the age-friendly movement here has been the publication of a joint policy document between the Department of the Environment and the Department of Health. And it focuses on 6 interconnected principles comprising aging in place, supporting urban renewal, promoting sustainable lifetime housing and universal design, using assistive technology, staying socially connected, and working together. And I think if our approach to housing delivery can be truly animated by these principles in a balanced and coherent way together, then we have every chance of succeeding. But we are just at the start of this journey. So let's look at the first impulse around people, aging, and trajectories. And I'd like to thank Ken Finnegan for permission to use these beautiful portraits he took of people attending the Birches Daycare Centre back in 2012. I think when it comes to our being and being older, the first thing I think we need to do is to dissolve the barriers between us and them and to meet our future selves. I suppose to start with, the question is what will we be doing in our future lives? And I think what we're looking at is a huge paradigm shift in how we are living our lives going forward. The top diagram shows, I suppose, a traditional view of a life course, really split into 3 areas around learning, around production, and around leisure. And it sees us living out to our early 80s. If, as I think a lot of our aging research is pointing to, that for example, the cohort of baby girls born this year here in Ireland, about 50% may live to be over 100. Our life courses are going to look and are starting to look quite different, where there's much more diversity and we're engaging with learning and production at leisure at many different stages over our life course. And there's a challenge for us to reorient our services and our approaches to address this kind of more diversity. But what it does do is it gets us, I suppose, the need to recognize that each of us have our own profiles of needs and characteristics and capabilities and preferences. That for most of us, our profile of capabilities will change substantially through the courses of our lives. And that changing circumstances, whether it's an accident or a life-changing event, may lead to significant changes in our needs. And that context influences our activities and hence our degree of accessibility and participation. The following 2 diagrams are from the World Health Organization's Healthy Aging Global Report of 2015. And the diagram on the left shows some different trajectories that we may have in front of us. The x-axis is a time or our aging period, and the y-axis is our physical capability. And I think here we'd all prefer option A, where our intrinsic capacity remains high until the end of our lives. For an old Irish quote, it was to some extent, live well and wake up dead, as in terms of our approach to end of life. But that's not always the pathway we have. And pathways B and C, B is a very interrupted trajectory with events, disease, falls, accidents, or sensory declines causing a decrease in capacity where there may be some recovery. And the pathway C is a much more steadily declining trajectory where capacity declines steadily until death. The diagram on the right is similar, but shows I suppose, the trajectories between what you might call our intrinsic capacities, which is, I suppose, how we are, and our functional ability, how we participate in society. And I suppose the gap that we're seeing there really is I suppose, that impact gap where the role of our environment plays a huge importance in helping to enhance our functional ability and compress or decline in later years. We're also very, very lucky here in Ireland that I suppose following investments by organizations like the Atlantic Philanthropy over many years, there is a huge resource of expertise on aging, and not the least being Professor Anne Kenny in the Tilda and Gerontology Centre at Trinity and St. James's Hospital. And Roseanne recently published a wonderful book called Age Proofing. And it is a guide, I suppose, highlighting what new science of living a longer and healthier life can do. And the book highlights, I suppose, a range of 8 or 9 things that we can do to make our lives, I suppose, just more successful going into aging. They're all around there, but the ones that I would just like to highlight are things like friendship and our reliance and connection with friends, physical exercise, diet and the rituals of meals and that. And I suppose a very important one is our sense of purpose. What is it that gets us out of bed in the morning and is behind our lives? So I think there are lots of things that we can do, and so some of the topics around the outside highlight some of the kind of environmental aspects that can help support us. You know, being close to water or time in nature, walking in gardens. I'll talk a little bit more around the role of technology and sometimes our need to detach from technology, particularly at night if we want a good night's sleep. But here, I suppose in Ireland and right across Europe and I suppose in Western Anglo-Saxon countries, we're really facing, I suppose, a shift to the left. We have, I suppose, the 3 bands of color in the middle there show different spots of where we may be aging. And we picked this up when we did some very early research to set up the center in Dundalk. So I suppose on the right-hand side, there is where we have needs for care in long-term nursing settings. On the left-hand side is I suppose independence at home. And in the middle, we have that kind of zone where we are at home, but we do need more care and support in community settings. And there are, I suppose, 2 slightly different drivers for how we move through this. One is around changing care levels, around interdependence and varying levels of interdependence. And that's some issues like cognitive decline, multiple chronic diseases, and the beginning of using high respite services and the impact of a lot of carer stress. The press to probably relocate from our home and community setting to longer term care is probably more guided by extreme isolation in the home, or decline in functional status, or inability to really to be able to live safely at home, and issues around confidence or concerns with mobility and falling. So we have a press really in terms of policy and practice to try and drive our arrow to a leftward shift to be able to support us more definitely at home. Albeit our life course experiences and pressures are maybe pushing in the opposite way, and how we reconcile them is I think a real key to how we manage going forward. What it impacts on is our human performance, our health and well-being, and our social participation, and they're key elements that really underpin universal design to be able to create the environments that can support the kind of change we envisage here. So I suppose it's in the world of, do we improve or move? And both for us and for the environments that we're living in. So I was coming on to environments and a culture of caring. I think what makes age-friendly environments and housing slightly different from mainstream housing is how interwoven it is with our wider culture of caring and who cares for whom. So the diagram on the right here shows those kind of places, you know, whether or not we're living at home, but our need to grow more personal attenuation, or to be able to help our autonomy at home. The press of deinstitutionalizing nursing homes to make them more like home, and I suppose those areas in the middle, which is around sort of assisted living, which is environments that are very, very home-like, but where we might be able to support slightly greater levels of independence. We've got lots of examples of these starting to emerge here in Ireland, and there's been a huge amount of work done by the Housing Agency and our departments, Age Friendly Ireland, the Centre of Excellence in Universal Design across all of these, and some of the specialist areas. What I'd like to look at during the course of the presentation is, I suppose, housing that fits into these 2 areas, which is housing with supports, or community housing with care. And I'm going to look at those through a couple of different exemplars at the European and UK levels, and then here in Ireland. There are also, I suppose, a whole new area of kind of community-led initiatives, and I'm not going to dwell on them today. I think that's for another day, but I think they're going to be a very important new approach as well. In the UK, a few years ago, the Happy programme produced, which was Housing for an Ageing Population, produced some lovely guidance on how to make age-friendly homes based on a study of 12 exemplar cases across Europe and the UK. And they highlighted kind of 10 key characteristics. I'm not going to go through them all here, but a few that were very high were things like daylight in the home and in shared spaces, and the role of balconies and outdoor spaces, access to planting and trees in the natural environment, and lots of storage for belongings and bicycles. So there's a lot of I suppose trends and characteristics that we can see being important in our housing going forward. And what's happened, I suppose, is over the course of the last few years, these have percolated into practice. And one of the large practices in the UK that has been doing a lot of work in the area is PRP. And these are just to I suppose, just to highlight how some of those things have come into play. So these are footprints for sort of housing with support type projects. And you can see here the role of kind of dual aspect, which is allowing light to come in on both sides of an apartment. The role of gallery and deck access to be able to come in from one side, with balconies and galleries on the other side. There's a mixture of 1 and 1.5 bed units, and we'll come back to that in a little bit later. Centering around the role of kind of nature and landscaping, and also quite a bit of kind of shared and community spaces to be able to support the activities of older people living in these kinds of places. There's just a couple of photos of them to kind of give them some physical context. So you'll see there some balconies and winter gardens from the streets, the decks and gallery access, the internal views of the balconies and winter gardens, and some of the kind of protected landscaping and courtyarding. There are, I suppose, an infinite number of ways of taking these kinds of concepts and configuring them on sites, and we've seen a lot of that starting to emerge now over the last few years. I suppose just briefly, some of the topics that kind of emerge when people are looking at this kind of apartment dwelling. I've highlighted 3 different apartments here, a 1-bedroom, one in the middle, which is kind of 1.5 bedroom, and a 2-bedroom one, and they all kind of pose slightly different different challenges. And so these are really just exemplars to highlight some of the issues. But some of the kinds of things that we're seeing are, for example, kitchen layouts, and generally we organize kitchens to I suppose to fit in as kind of C or E shape, so that they're safe and the movement is tight. But they take a very prominent role along the edge of the building here, in being able to sort of deal with light, even though kitchens mightn't be the things we're in all the time. So the one in the middle is just a view of a different kind of approach, where maybe we've prioritized the dining experience or the dining table to be close to a window, so that you've got that kind of view of what's happening outside and the connection. But what that does then is it changes the shape of the kitchen and how it works, and there are pros and cons around those kinds of kitchens. They may work better in some regards, but maybe not as safe in regards to movement. So the other kind of thing here is the role of 1.5 bedroom apartments, which is the one we have in the middle here. And it's a funny one, because a lot of our age-friendly documentation is promoting the value of 1.5 bedroom apartments, because it means that you can have somebody else to come in and stay over and have visitors and carers. But I think our planners are anxious about them because there's a risk that a 1.5 bedroom could be perceived as a very small 2 bedroom in terms of the topology mix. So we have those kinds of issues going on at the moment. Some of the other things that we're seeing in some of the areas here is being able to open up partitions between living rooms and bedrooms to be able to increase access. The balconies and the winter gardens, as I mentioned before, but also possibly the introduction of a here in a 2-bedroom one, of a visitor WC separate from an ensuite. And I suppose these are cost benefit issues as well that we have to kind of tease out, but having a separate visitor WC does provide an opportunity for more dignity and personal space for the occupants to be separate from that. It's popular and there's demand for it, but we have to trade it with costs. Looking at some of this through European approaches, a study done in Australia on new architecture for new aging highlighted some other aspects by looking at some European projects. And I suppose happiness, normality, equality were key objectives. But one of the themes that they did pick out amongst 8 features was that small is beautiful. And I think that's one of the issues that we need to look at when we start looking at maybe clustered and community dwellings, around how many apartments or units do we put together in order to be able to support that kind of intimacy and small grouping, and that we're not building lots of very, very large units where there's a risk of almost warehousing. One of the projects that the Europeans did pick out was this really interesting project in Basel. Recently, our Croke Park was awarded, I think, the first age-friendly stadium in the world, and there was some celebration there. But this is an interesting scheme where an age-friendly housing scheme has actually been abutted to a football stadium in Basel as a centre for bringing older people together and allowing people who are coming to visit meet their older person and engage in watching sports. So it's quite an innovative move. Looking at our own project that I'm intimately aware of, it's the Great Northern Haven in Dundalk. I suppose some of its key characteristics were its adjacency to the town centre and to primary care. It's 16 units around dual aspect patterns of sort of street and gallery access. It was a kind of combination of 1.5, 2-bedroom units. Ergonomics and ecology are very important, but it did also start to explore, I suppose, 2 things that are worth looking at a little bit more, and the role of ICT and the nature of support, and what do we look at as support in some of these emerging housing with support projects. So our project, our support wasn't directly on site. It was living in the neighborhood and served into the house. And it was a role that we brought forward called Cultacha, which is Gaelic for strong support, or somebody who has your back. But that type of role has been growing now with I suppose a range of different terms: support coordinator, or social prescriber, or community navigator. It's being very, very well promoted and brought forward around Ireland by Alone at the moment, and was also at the centre of a cross-border project called Empower. But essentially, it looks at an older person in the centre of an ecosystem, and really tries to identify what are the kinds of services and supports that they may need, either informally through their family and the community and voluntary world, or more formally through public health services and further into private provision. So we have kind of these layers of the onion, and really the role of the support coordinator is to help empower the older person to navigate and find their way across these ranges of services. The second piece that we really looked at was around technology and technology acceptance. And I suppose we see technology falling into three areas. One around how you can see on these axes within the circle here. One is around strengthening social and informal connectivity. One is around strengthening connectivity with our health system and managing our health. And the other, I suppose, is over time increasing context awareness and moving beyond, I suppose, reactive services to things that are becoming maybe more preventative and ultimately predictive. And so that tech is dealing with lots of issues that we've seen. You know, it's for enjoyment, it's for learning, it increases resilience, it can help with reablement and recovery, it can help with compensation, and it can help with care support. I suppose today there are ranges of issues that I think will maybe not be as dominant in future years as older people become more digitally engaged, but there are challenges today around, you know, really the motivations to engage and getting engagement at the right time and dealing with digital literacy and usefulness and usability. But I think these are issues that we're dealing with going forward. Looking at community households and supporting with care, which is maybe coming at our world from the other side. This is a scheme that we saw in Rossander's Garden, Sweden, and it is 4 units on 2 floors, and each unit comprises 10 living units around a shared and community dining spaces and kitchens and living spaces. And I suppose the key thing here is mediating the sense of independence, autonomy in the living units, and the extent to which some people see that as being their home, and this as being, and the community being their neighborhood, or the extent to which the unit is more of their bedroom and they spend more of their time living in the neighborhood. How we mediate those kinds of ambiguities, I think, is one of the very big either successes or failures of this kind of housing. That's just a shot of one of the one of the living units. They're roughly around 35 square meters, so they're certainly a lot bigger than the kinds of units that we would see in our nursing homes and residential care settings. And they do provide for quite a bit of flexibility in arrangement, and even include things like microwaves and small fridges and that, so people can boil kettles and you know, have snacks in their rooms. That model has been looked at in a very interesting project here in Tipperary, or sorry, County Limerick. It's actually at the boundary. I think it's in County Limerick with Carebright, which is in Bruff, and this is a housing scheme for people with a dementia, and it's been organised around 3 households of 6 living units each. So about 18 in total. So that's a kind of a you know, sort of a concept diagram of what it may look like. And so that mix of the living units and then the shared spaces. But these kinds of places are tend to be regulated by HIQA, so they bring other issues with them. That's a quick snapshot of what they look like. So you can see the 3 bungalows here and their units. A very extensive kind of farmyard garden for being able to kind of explore nature and get around and that, and then a community hub building at the front. The units themselves, or the bungalows, have, I mean, there's a lovely charm to them, but I suppose the thing that really there is that issue around mediating between, I suppose, the front door to my living unit or the front door to the overall bungalow, and they're the kinds of things around our kind of, you know, layers of mediating private and neighborhood space and supporting various levels. But that type of smaller kind of community dwelling, you know, I mean, these approaches we're also looking at in relation to, you know, people with disabilities and people with acquired brain injuries where they're not able to live in their own homes. So so these are kind of really trying to move away from the institutional settings down into things that are much smaller and community based. And I suppose there are issues around what are the kinds of numbers of units that we would have in these places. So I think the last impulse before moving on is I suppose around common presence, and I suppose I love the statement here by Voisy, an architect at the turn of the century. My French isn't great, so la question posée, la solution était indiquée, which is, I think, is the question posed, the solution is indicated. And I think it highlights the really very important role of programming and analysis and the brief in how we're going to come and deal with some of these kinds of projects going forward, because they are both living places and to some extent also working places. And then getting beyond the functionality of them. So the Housing Forum in the UK have brought forward a guide called Older and Wiser to try and find ways and present some ways of tackling some of this housing. So you see that, you know, there are real strands there around people, homes, money, design, and delivery. And I suppose the two things that is worth highlighting here is that planning class of C2 and C3, which in the UK would differentiate between residential homes or dwelling homes and what would be residential care settings. So that differentiation is alive there. But also that real requirement about trying to get the brief right. There are many different starting places here, but finding a way to navigate across this can be a bit of a challenge. So I have a couple of things that maybe to talk about. I've been very inspired by a piece of work that was done a long time ago by William Pina in the States called Problem Seeking. And I suppose it separates out the kind of programming and analysis work for as long as possible before we get embedded in synthetic design. And it really focuses on I suppose, four key considerations around function, form, economy, and also time. So issues around our relationships and activities, I think they're the natural things for us to have to look at. But we need to get a better understanding of the business models and of the not just the capital costs, but the running costs and the operational costs of how these places can sustain going forward. And I suppose also how I think a piece is very important here is the element of time, and not only how we respond to historical influences, but how we deal with inevitable change and future growth. I suppose these kind of overlay into a range of kind of key steps, which are kind of range from kind of being qualitative and quantitative. And you know, we work our way through these in many different ways. And to some extent, a lot of our regulations and our hard briefs come in the area of kind of goals and facts. But I think one of the things that's interesting at the briefing and problems is really exploring concepts at the early stage and to sort of tease out what different kinds of abstract approaches to doing our housing and the housing with support can come together. So there's a lot of different concepts in play, issues around priority, dealing with kind of what's important and what do we value, you know, density and levels of interaction. I've highlighted a couple here because I think they're quite important. One is around that area point around people grouping, and how do we see our groupings of people in terms of their individual small scale or large scale, or finding small scale within large scale. So I think there's I mean, that's a very important piece that I think we need to work on. And I think the other one that is very high is around, I suppose, flexibility and tolerance. The opportunities for expansion and conversion and versatility. And I suppose the issue around tailored or loose fit. And we do tend to pressurize ourselves to developing housing that is very tailored to very definite use. And it is a challenge, but we need to try and find ways to have looser fit that will allow and be accommodating of our variations and change over time. And I think that's one of our battles, I think, with our funders, because tolerance and loose fit does cost more. I suppose the other thing then is I suppose economic considerations and I suppose the battle between capital and operating costs. And I think there really is a need for financial innovation. This is from the Happy project, and it kind of overlays kind of ranges of housing, but from specialists, from mainstream specialists and formal care. But here in Ireland, if we were looking at support at the support side, there are two very different budget submodels. One is I suppose home support and home care and how funding comes through that side of the equation, or from the more formal settings, funding coming through the Fair Deal and our private funding. So we have different financial models funding here, and we have different capital funding models, whether it's coming from the Department of Environment through CAS or CALF and other models, or whether or not it's coming in from the HSE or the Department of Health on some of them. So we have these they're currently driving very different responses. And I suppose one of the pieces is, can we start to find new funding models? Can we loosen up some of these? Can we find more flexible pooling? Do we need to look at some more insurance-based models that they have in the States? Or something that's starting to be looked at is the whole role of social impact financing and getting financial propositions that match, I suppose, the impacts that we might be able to promise. So I think we are really facing a question around our ability to develop viable social market that can stimulate innovation and sustain growth while enhancing quality. So I think we have some work to have to kind of tease out on our way going forward. And I think just before wrapping up in the last couple of pieces, I just want to highlight, we meet our functional need and we meet site need, but I think we also have to be sensitive to our human and spiritual needs. And I just like to draw on a couple of quotes here that have inspired me, I suppose, from John O'Donoghue and Anam Cara, from Christopher Alexander and that. And it really is around kind of getting a sense of common purpose and a shared vision that really faces us going forward, and to be as holistic as we can, and move away from the kind of dualism that we tend to get locked in. So the idea of us working together and weaving many parts together, I think is great. And again, with the respect and inclusion, the WHO is very strong on. It's one of the key domains of the WHO, and I think it is it's one of the pieces that we tend to push to the edge, but I think it can be at the very heart of our cities in terms of strengthening humanity and love and creating the space for aging with grace and dignity. So I'm going to finish with just a couple of pointers. I suppose the barrage of older people across Europe and the voices of older people in the forums across Europe is nothing for us without us. So that goal to try and get greater participation and greater participatory methods so that we and older people can be more active in the participation of the design of our communities, I think is something that we really have to learn to work forward with and to do more of going forward. It is starting to happen much more here in Ireland, and I think some of the design awards on the urban realm have seen this come through, but I think it's something that we need to be continually alert to. The other one is, I suppose, dissolving and reshaping boundaries, and these are just two images, I suppose. They're a little bit from left field, but they animate me, I suppose, from a view of kind of transgressing into across boundaries positively. One is a school in Denmark, and it's a school with no classrooms. So it has taken away the boundary of the classroom and looked at new ways of being able to bring education together, and so the living and being together is as big a part of the school as the classroom. And the second one is an interesting one, I suppose, about re-examining our grounding, and it's an installation by Toyo Ito, the great Japanese architect, in the Berlin gallery a few years ago. And whatever about dealing with our grids, he really looked to try and challenge what we look at on our floors in relation to moving about. There comes a time when we really do need very flat and level floors. I'm not going to, but there are times when landscape and contour matters, and I suppose this was just an installation to show how level will matter to us. So just to finish off, I think there are three action areas that I'd like to I'd like to highlight for ourselves. One is to nurture belonging and being together, and around the importance of forming authentic communities for aging. So I think that's around being responsive to diverse community dynamics, whether it's around sustaining, changing, creating, or relocating. And I think also being sensitive to service, whether that's around empowering, supporting, it's around having someone to rely on, and it's around us being people that we rely for. The second one, I think, is around fostering our attachment to inclusive and joyous places and spaces. So I think that's around engaging with the multisensory mind and enjoying movement inside, outside, and between, providing shelter, comfort, and security, and finally supporting activities that satisfy people's aspirations out to the end of our lives. And then the last one, I suppose, is maybe a call to action, if I can be that brave, around maybe enhancing the role and the zone of architectural practice and design going forward. So I think with our clients, I think it's to strengthen our participatory design methods and problem analysis mechanisms together. I think within our communities, it's around maybe increasing our influence on the local processes of change, and maybe how we can drive things like local economic and community planning and the participation the local public participation networks and other fora at the local level. And then I think finally within ourselves, I suppose we're all part of universal personhood, and that we advocate for the universal and the inclusive. But at our core, I think we need to both personalize what it means to be professional and professionalize what it means to be personal. And I think if we can balance those two approaches, I think we will be well on the way to being able to get our heads around some of the housing challenges that we're going to have going forward. Thank you very much.
You're on mute there, Ruth.
There's always going to be somebody who stayed on mute. Apologies, everyone. I was just thanking Rod for that presentation. I really, really enjoyed it. And we're going to have some questions and answers now. I want to start, I suppose, just as a piece of positive feedback that came in from Richard Duncan to say this is a terrific presentation. So thank you very much, Rod. And thanks, Richard, for that positive feedback. One question to get started, Rod. You spoke about the importance of the project brief in your presentation, and I know that's something that we come across over and over again in the centre. Any examples of a brief having an impact with regards to universal design?
Thanks, Ruth. I think there's a really interesting couple that actually came through the process of the jury when we were looking at these Universal Design Awards for the RIAI, and I think both the winner and the highly commended both really showed how the role of the brief really mattered. And I think for the India building, there was a client who really wanted to insist that this building was inclusive of every type and shape and movement of person that there could be to be able to work in this environment. And I think that the client really did inspire the brief to be able to make sure that we were getting the kinds of workplaces that would come through. And I think in the housing scheme, I think it was that kind of real intimate understanding of the needs of a person with an autism in their home, and the balancing that with the needs of the family. And there was a real, I suppose, in-depth understanding and sensitivity in both of those projects that I think was able to drive really, really great design.
Okay, I have to say I agree with you there. And in fact, we're hoping that the client for India Buildings may come and present at our annual conference in October, because we think that the approach in that brief was really, really strong, and we'd like to find out more about it. Another question, it's I suppose a more specific question. Do you know of any developments towards this style of accommodation for interdependent living for younger adults with acquired disabilities?
I mean, I can't put my fingers on it directly. I mean, we do have I do some work with an organization called ANVERS, which is a housing body associated with acquired brain injuries. And we've certainly been exploring some very, very interesting approaches there, and they've done a lovely project down in Waterford, which is probably more in that kind of clustered living. It's a housing scheme for four, but it does mediate that space between the private space and the community living, and the role of the garden and the external space, and I suppose making environments they're there to live in, but they're also both rehabilitatory and therapeutic at the same time. So that's certainly one example that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's a few others that we need to look at.
Okay, and sorry, just to check with you, Rod, the name of the organisation on that scheme?
Acquired Brain Injuries Ireland, ABI.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Then one that's a question that's more related, I suppose, to regulation and the context in Ireland. Is there a need to widen the span of Part M to drive home requirements to fully accessible rather than just visitable, which is what we have at the moment?
I would say yes, but I think the difficulty with our regulations is getting the mix between them being inspiring and or being more prescriptive. And I think how we frame that, I think, would be very important, so that it can still accommodate innovative solutions in terms of how we meet them. But I do think that we do need to be able to get those additional spaces and that tolerance to be able to, because that would allow our mainstream housing to be able to address and support ranges of change right out to end of life.
Okay, thanks very much, Rod. Another question that's just come in. Brilliant presentation, Rod. Referring back to dissolving boundaries, what do you think the future is for the boundaries between housing, supported housing and nursing homes, long-term care, and the overall continuum of housing and care? Now, that's a big question.
A big one. I think our challenge at the moment is that we're coming at this from two different ends. We're coming at it from what would be mainstream housing, and then starting to see how do we do that with housing with support. And so that's probably that journey of starting to make housing supportive of autonomy attenuation, as we lose a bit of autonomy. The other side is we are coming at it from starting to want to deinstitutionalize the long-term care settings. I think I'm hoping that actually we will end up with quite a bit of variety and mix in that space in between. I think our problem at the moment is the funding streams tend to anchor us in two different places, and I think until we find some new and imaginative ways of being able to tease out, I suppose, funding in the middle ground of that continuum, I think that's going to be the key place to do. There is some work going on it. I mean, it's not to say that people aren't going for it, but it's tricky, and we're all very defensive of existing pots of money. So there's not always an enthusiasm to loosen them up to be able to find new investment sources.
And then something just related to that, Rod. Do you see any opportunities then? You mentioned community-led or cooperative housing. Do you see opportunities in this area?
Well, I think I think the community-led projects, and it's a new area. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but not very well supported. And I think we're seeing it in the UK, and I think we're starting to see it now that community-led initiatives will be I think we'll be able to take a bigger foothold. I think the challenge with community-led initiatives is their governance and long-term sustainability, because there's a lot of enthusiasm with stakeholders to come together to kind of get it set up. I mean, they take quite a long time to do it. So it's at what stage do we deliver them across our life course? Because we're I think you need to be able to engage in the process of bringing a community-led project together, because it will take time. But then there's the legacy issues around what happens when somebody passes on, and how what's the governance and ethos model of those communities. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for them, because I think there's a lot of community energy around to try and make them right. And I think there's every chance that we would get the mix right, and we would get the response to the environment, and the role, some of the big things about, nature and water and all those other kinds of things could come through those projects much better. But I think there's an issue, or there's a layer around governance that we just need to work harder on, I think.
Okay.
I'd love to be back in a few years later chatting with you all again around some community-led projects. Yeah.
Okay. And then one in relation to, I suppose, your call for action. I think you spoke about, maybe you'll repeat that, because I thought that was very rich around the professional and the personal, and a little bit about, how can architects better influence then the design environment that we work in?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, the age-friendly movement here in Ireland has been amazing, because it's really grafted into the structures and processes at local government. So we've got, age-friendly alliances, which bring stakeholders together at the county level. We've got older people's fora and councils. But I think when we get to kind of do the consultations and bring the information forward at the local level, if there are local architects and planners in the local authorities, then their voices will come through, but for local authorities where maybe architecture practice isn't embedded, I think it would be great to get local architects and local architecture groupings to participate in those processes more, because architects know about the practical issues around trying to get these things to happen, and I think architects' voices in some of those local community planning processes could be very valuable. I think the other piece was just that when we get down to dealing with I suppose some of the priorities that we tackle, when we have to do our trading off around what do we put into our housing and what don't we put in, I think that's where that boundary between our professional and personal life needs to come through, because we as professionals, we understand the processes and we understand the mechanisms to be able to bring things through and the guidance and that, but there are personal things that may or may not be the right thing to do, and we have to be and to be in tune and to be sensitive to it. I suppose it's so that we have empathy and compassion for the people whose housing we are looking to create. Because I think when we're looking at age-friendly housing, we're not looking at properties that are market purchases. We're looking at places that are the places that people will spend the rest of their lives, and it's place. So I think our sensitivities to be able to inform that, I think would be invaluable.
Rod, I think we're coming to the end, and a few questions have come in. I'm just kind of looking at them, I'll paraphrase a little bit because there's a few coming in, but it's people asking you to comment on diverse integrated neighborhoods, I suppose, and intergenerational living rather than older people's housing. Yeah. And I suppose how to get the balance right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's vital, and so to some extent that comes down to some of the numbers issues around how many and where. But I mean, some of that stuff that came from our dreamlike neighborhoods were very, very intergenerational, and I mean, I suppose it starts by looking at where do we see the role of our families, and that connects us to our children and to our grandchildren, and where are they, and connection with schools, and that these places are lively and in the heart of communities. I think that the fear is that we cordon off older people's housing, and we've had that risk, as we did with nursing homes. They went behind a hedge 2 miles out the village, and that's not. I think we have to see older people living in housing in the heart of our communities, and cheek by jowl with all generations.
Okay, look, I think that might be a really nice note to end on. So Rod, I just wanted to thank you very much. I really enjoyed that, and when you're live, sometimes you don't get to enjoy this, but yeah. Thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And just to say, there is lots of positive feedback coming in. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us this lunchtime. And we hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.